get started? Yeah. Right. Thank you so much for coming on at the last session of the day to talk about administration and governance of the Power Platform. I couldn't think of a more exciting topic to talk about on a Saturday afternoon. It's actually, I actually mean it. Thanks to the sponsors for putting this event together. I've had a brilliant day, and I hope you've had as well. I'm a program manager on the PowerApps customer advisory team, a PowerCat at Microsoft. You can talk to me about administration and governance of the Power Platform, the COE kit. If you don't know what that is yet, I'll cover it during the session. I also love escape rooms, and you can also talk to me about my dog. I'm not a good conversation starter with new people, so I thought I'd put a couple of hints there, so if people come find me afterwards at the pub quiz or so, talk to me about my dog first. But yeah, let's get started with the actual content. Digital transformation is truly powered by people. For most kind of modern businesses to compete and progress with the digital transformation, they need more people, more end users, and Gartner predicts that there'll be 4 times more citizen developers compared to experienced developers by 2023. And kind of in a few studies that Forrester and Gartner have conducted, they found out that there's still 37% of organizations who have critical business processes based on paper. And that means that there's a paper sheet in a drawer somewhere where a critical process is based on, but it also means that data isn't being used to actually drive action, right? You've got that data on that paper sheet in a drawer. You're not driving insights on that. You're not reporting on top of it. You're not doing anything with the data. You're just kind of creating a stack of paper in a cupboard. And really, in order to kind of get to a place where you've got 4 times more developers, but also you really accelerate your digital transformation journey, you need to embrace opportunities together. And that really means that subject matter experts that are close to the business need to be able to solve their problems themselves. Digital transformation shouldn't be something that is done to them by their IT department who are like, yeah, I saw that you've had a paper process. I've built you an app for that. I've never really spoken to you. I don't really know what your day-to-day process is like. But here, I've done it for you. No, it's those people that are facing the problem who need to be able to solve it for themselves. But at the same time, it also means to enable the IT department, the central IT department, the administrators, to put in guardrails so that subject matter experts can operate confidently within the realms of the platform. As the number of kind of developers grow, both kind of worldwide, but also within an organization, governance becomes a key criteria to ensure that digital transformation provides the return of investment that is desired, provides that real positive effect that you're earning for. And with more developers, there's more potential for gaps and for areas that could lead to an organization falling out of compliance, that could lead to security issues. And that's not a problem with kind of citizen developers, it's just a problem with the increased amount of developers that you've got. And having a strong governance model in place is a fundamental requirement for really unlocking the potential of those organizations and experiencing the full benefits of digital transformation. So governance is a foundational part of the Power Platform, and it's really important in that new world where everyone is a maker, everyone can be a maker. It's also a mandate to promote kind of the development and the strategy, and to allow your organization to thrive with those tools. But don't lose sight of the end goal. Don't think about governance as the end goal. It's a mean to unlock further adoption, to accelerate your digital transformation, to enable those makers to adopt at scale. It's not the end goal is not locking everything down. Your adoption doesn't stop with governance. It starts there. And the philosophy is really to empower everyone to be a maker to create an ecosystem where everyone can be a maker comfortably, and one that doesn't escalate privileges. Like many IT initiatives, governance is not a single-step approach. It's not a checklist that you're done with at the end. It requires focus on kind of multiple aspects of the platform. And we'll talk about those three in detail during the session. So there's the aspect of securing the platform, creating those digital guardrails. There's monitoring, having an oversight of the activities that are going on in the platform, knowing what your makers are up to, what they're connecting to. And then there's driving alerts and actions based on what is going on in the platform for your kind of particular organization. But the reason you implement governance, or the reason you start thinking about governance, is to unlock adoption at scale, to really nurture those makers, to find those subject matter experts that have a problem that they want to solve, to really evangelize the product internally, develop a community, provide training and support and learning tracks for those makers. And I want to share a couple of examples of organizations where we've seen that succeed. So here's Georgia from Schlumberger, one of the customers I work with quite closely. She built an app within 3 hours when the coronavirus kind of started, and it helps their internal people get kind of preventive measures, access to internal corporate doctors, questions and answers, a self-assessment, and if you fail the assessment, it automatically through Power Automate sends a notification to the nearest corporate doctor, so they're kind of are able to phone you and advise you on the best next steps. The app was launched 6,000 times within 24 hours. It's the fastest ever kind of single adoption at a single application. And this was possible because there's, within Schlumberger, Alan Shah is kind of driving their digital transformation, and he's provided a digital playbook with components that enable rapid prototyping. So she was able to kind of pull the components that she needed, like navigation, header bar, all of that good stuff, forms, into the application. Within 3 hours, she had something that she could publish live that was then launched so many times. And the other reason why she could do that is because she was encouraged and empowered to do so. So Georgia is not a developer. She's part of the health and safety organization. She's based out of London. She was an intern 18 months ago, and an intern in the health and safety department, not an intern in the IT department, etc. So she felt empowered to create that app based on the risk that she saw within her part of the organization. Another story is Ness from Heathrow. She came back from maternity leave, and that can be a really difficult time to come back from. But at that time, she discovered the internal Power Platform community at Heathrow. She's gained a whole new set of skills, and with that, a whole new set of confidence. She's creating apps and flows for her business, and she actually advanced her career through the knowledge that she gained with the Power Platform. And then there's Simon from GSK, who's created a Power Rangers community internally that's 1,600 people strong, and it breaks down geographic and organizational silos. People collaborate with each other to create solutions where the whole organization benefits from them. And those use cases are the reason why you put governance in place. And I kind of really want to focus on that, because I talk to a lot of organizations who treat governance like a checklist, like, oh yeah, I've locked this down, I've locked this down, I've locked this down, and they don't focus on the fact that the reason you're doing it, the reason the Power Platform exists, is to unlock the potential of your organization and to solve all those digital transformation challenges where you don't have the budget and you don't have the developers to tackle all of them. So let's talk about kind of the building blocks that we mentioned earlier, and let's start with secure. So the first thing to understand is, where do your apps come from? There's a seeded license through Office 365 and Dynamics 365. So users who have an Office 365 license have access to PowerApps and Power Automate to create resources there. Individuals can also sign up to a community plan that gives them access to a developer environment. They can create resources there, but they can't share them with anyone. It's for their own development only. And then there's also a paid license that gives you access to kind of to the ability to build standalone apps and flows. And that's the one and only time I'll talk licensing your resources live within and what's called environment. So your apps and flows live within an environment, and your environment lives within an Azure Active Directory tenant. An environment is basically a container for all of those resources, and it's secured by the Azure Active Directory tenant that everything kind of lives in. Your environments can be managed through the Power Platform Admin Center, aka .msppack is the shortcut to it. The actual URL is impossible to remember. So if you take one thing away, it's this one. You manage your environments through the admin center there, and you secure your resources per environment. So there's different security roles per environment. For data residency concerns, each environment is created in a different region that you decide on when you create the environment, and you can't change it after you've created it. Each tenant comes with a default environment, and that the default environment gets created the first time someone gets assigned a license to PowerApps, and the default environment lives in the region closest to your Azure Active Directory tenant, so you don't have an influence on where the default environment gets created. There's different environment types. There's a production environment, which is a non-expiring full kind of environment. There's trial environments. They expire after 30 days, and each person can only have one trial environment at a time, so you can't create multiple trial environments anymore. There's the developer environment, which I've mentioned earlier, so you get that through signing up for the community plan. And the main difference is that it's just your environment, so you can't share. If you create an app within the community environment, you can't share that with anyone.
So can you access the CDS which is outside of that environment?
No.
So it's locked?
It's locked down to, yeah. And then, sorry? In the default environment, everyone is a maker, but not everyone is an admin of that environment. And non-default environments offer you the ability to kind of fine-grain who's got access to it, who's a maker, who's an admin, at a much closer kind of level. Best practice number 1 is establishing an environment strategy. So by default, everyone can create environments if there's capacity in your tenant. We would recommend kind of locking that down so only admins can create environments, and also assigning your Power Platform admins the new Power Platform Service admin role that gives them the ability to administer PowerApps, Power Automate, and Power BI. Restrict the creation of net new tenants, otherwise you'll have environments sprawl, you don't know what these environments are for, you don't know how to manage them. Treat the default environment as a personal productivity environment, and we would recommend renaming it. Other kind of organizations have renamed it to Playpen, Playground, Innovation Space, and just by name, when a maker creates a resource in that environment, they know that it's like for my own personal productivity. And then establish a process for what you want environments for. So we would recommend having a dedicated dev, test, and prod environment for your critical app. For each critical application. So if an application is critical, it deserves its own dev, test, and prod environment. A developer would be a maker in the dev environment only, but only a user in the test and prod environment, so they can't change the production version because they won't even have access to it, and that ensures supportability of the production instance there. And then you might have apps that are important, but they're not really critical. They could have a shared kind of test and production space, so you could have something like HR apps, central apps, marketing apps, where all the marketing applications are shared in the test and prod instance. Again, the developer wouldn't be a maker in that environment, but you can use Azure DevOps to deploy the solutions to that environment there. My colleague Denise has actually written a great blog about how to establish an environment strategy. There's a few things that kind of factor into that based on what licenses and how much capacity you've got. So I would really recommend reading that blog if you're in the beginning of establishing an environment strategy there. There's a few different admin roles. There's the global admin, which obviously gives you kind of tenant administration rights there. There's the Power Platform admin or Dynamics 365 service admin, and they give you a Power Platform administrative access. And for all of the partners out there, there's a delegated admin role, and full support for the Power Platform is coming soon, but is not quite available yet. As part of securing, we talk about 5 layers of security. So the Power Platform lives within your Azure Active Directory tenant. So all the goodness of Azure Active Directory, conditional access, applies to the Power Platform. So you can put in place conditional access policies by user, by location, by device. You've got environment roles, so maker and admin roles that are specified per environment. And you've got resource permissions for the apps, the flows, and the custom connectors. So even if I have access to an environment, if the app in that environment isn't shared with me, I can't see that. I can't see that application there. So based on that as well, if your application is using CDS security roles, you've got obviously a much richer security environment there, down to entity or field level. And you can also restrict inbound and outbound transactions cross-tenant there. The most important part is securing your data at rest. PowerApps doesn't escalate privileges. If you don't have access to something, you can't view it in an application, you can't build an application on top of it, you can't create an app or a flow over data that you don't already have access to. So the main thing to take into consideration is really securing your data at rest. I'm going to do a SharePoint example now, and Will is going to hate me for it.
Can I just ask a quick question about the cross-tenant?
Yes.
There was until, I think Manuela still being here, where if I've got access privileges and a user security role over the data for a particular CDS, I could use a different than my own tenant to be able to connect to that, even though it goes across tenant.
So inbound restrictions you can restrict using Azure Active Directory tenant, and that applies to all SaaS applications. Outbound, you have to raise a service ticket at the moment to restrict it. So if you raise a service ticket, Microsoft is going to restrict the connection. That then only applies to PowerApps and Power Automate, none of your other SaaS applications, but a self-service way for that is coming.
But inbound is through what, conditional access?
No, it's called Azure Active Directory tenant restrictions. I think the shortcut is, well, I can pull up the link later. I've got that. So it's not a Power Platform concept. It's an Azure Active Directory concept. But yeah, so both is possible. One just requires raising a service ticket. So yeah, back to my SharePoint example. So if you build an application on top of SharePoint, and through the application, the user can only view the data and maybe modify one specific field. If they know the URL of that SharePoint site and they've got contribute access to it, they can go in and they can create, delete, update, modify all kinds of stuff in the list. So just because you don't surface it through the application doesn't mean that because you've given them contribute access, they can still do all of that stuff. So really important to consider securing your data at rest. You can also share applications with Azure Active Directory security groups, and we would actually recommend that over sharing with individual users. It's much more maintainable if you share resources with groups, and those groups could be linked to, for example, departments or locations. Through Azure Active Directory guest access, you can also share apps with external users, but you have to be a tenant or a user admin to set up a guest user in your Azure Active Directory tenant, and then you can share the application with it. So there's no, as a regular maker, I won't be able to share my app with an external user if that user doesn't already exist in my tenant and has been set up by a global admin. And the last layer of security that I want to talk about is data loss prevention policies. They're basically recipes that define which connectors can be used together in one application. If the screenshot is clear enough. So in the example above, I've got two groups of connectors at the moment, business data and non-business data. In the example on the screen, I can create an application that uses Outlook and Office 365 users together. I can also create an application that uses Dropbox, but I can't create an application that uses Outlook and Dropbox together because they're in different parts of the bucket. So a common misunderstanding is that if you put a connector in non-business data allowed, I can't create resources on top of it. That's not true. It just means you can't connect to connectors that sit in the business data allowed bucket. Coming in April, and very often requested by everyone I talk to, is the ability to block connectors. So you will then have a third bucket, a blocked bucket, where you can move, for example, your social media, your sharing connectors, and they will be fully blocked, so no one can create resources on top of that. With the blocking in mind, because it's coming quite soon, some best practices around DLP policies. So we would recommend setting up a policy that spans all of your tenants, where those social media, Dropbox, all of those connectors that you don't want are completely blocked. And then creating a more restrictive policy for your default and training environments, where maybe only your Office 365 connectors are business data connectors. And then creating exception policies where for your kind of critical applications, for your ALM environments, and that could be, you might very well have a marketing department that can connect to Twitter because they're running their social media campaigns through that. So rather than allowing that in any of the kind of overarching policies, you would create an exception policy that only applies to those three environments, that they're dev, test, and prod environment where Twitter is allowed. Only a restricted number of people would be makers in that environment and can access that connector, but they're kind of your trusted people. So kind of based on that, you can create policies that apply to all environments, policies that only apply to a few environments, or policies that apply to everything except specific environments. With that, moving on to kind of the monitor part. So once you've secured everything, you're happy with your access, you've set up your data loss prevention policies, and that it's not something that you will do just as a one-off. Data loss prevention policies will evolve over time with your use cases. You'll have to adjust them, working together with kind of your users there. So just doing a time check. You then move on to monitor, where you monitor what's going on in the platform. There's the out-of-the-box analytics that come with the Power Platform Admin Center. You can monitor based on usage, based on location, based on capacity. You get error reporting there, you get service performance there, and you can also build your own reports on top of that using management connectors, which I'll talk about in a second. The reports in the Power Platform Admin Center are available for 28 days. Content is refreshed daily. You can't extend the 28 days at the moment. And access is available for either the Power Platform admin, the global admin, or the environment admin for the environment that they're an admin of. And you get environment level analytics. At the moment, you can't pull a report from there for all of your environments, for your tenants, but you get the environment level analytics there. There's also the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center where you've got the audit log. So there's your activity logging is going on there. So you get activity like your typical CRUD operations, when someone creates a flow, when someone creates an application, when someone launches an application, stuff about permissions, starting trials, and that's all logged in the activity logging through the Security and Compliance Center. And there's an API provided on top of that, so you can build flows, for example, that trigger based on activity within the activity logging. It must be enabled at the organization level and is then available for your organization. And the Power Platform admin role doesn't give you access to that, so you need to be a global admin or a compliance manager to have access to that log. There's also the management connectors. So those are connectors available for PowerApps and Power Automate through which you can govern the platform, it's really cool because you can use its own tools to govern the platform. So there's connectors available, and there's PowerShell commandlets available as well, and there's parity between what's available in both of those things. So you can really use those management connectors to create monitoring solutions based on your specific environments. And there's like an example here is a Power BI dashboard that's built using data from the management connectors, that shows me the reports that I want to see for my organization, that shows me the filters that I want to see for my organization. I'm able to filter by connector, by environment, by department, by app builder department, for example. So I can see, kind of on this example, the manufacturing department has built a lot of applications. Maybe I need to reach out to them and see what they're doing, and if we can leverage what they've done for other departments as well. And the last bucket of that governance is alerting and acting. So you've secured, you're monitoring what's going on, but to actually get kind of value, you need to drive action based on what you're monitoring and not just doing it for the sake of it. And for that part, again, you can use the management connectors to drive action and insights to drive alerts to you. So just one example, if you've not built a flow in Power Automate before, you would have an action that's using the Power Platform management connector to say list environments, get my applications as an admin, and through that you can implement alerts to get a list of new applications, to receive an email when a new connector is added, so you immediately can kind of categorize that into your DLP policies, all that kind of good stuff there. Kind of a little bit more advanced, you could set up an email that welcomes new makers and identifies champions. So you could set up a flow that detects when an application or a flow has been created, and you could check then if that maker is a new maker. You would then add them to an Azure Active Directory group, for example, an Office 365 group, and you could use that group to target communication to that maker. You could add them to a Yammer channel or a Teams channel where you've got your maker community, and you send them an email with resources about what's going on. So here's our guidelines for using these products. This is what we want you to follow. Here's a template that you can get started with, and here's some other learning resources that might be publicly available. And it means that someone who's discovered those tools, maybe through organic growth, maybe through their kind of Office 365 subscription, you immediately extend a hand out to them to say, you know, what you're doing, really, really good. Here's some best practices that we want you to follow, and here's who you reach out to when you need any help. We don't want you to fail on this journey, and we're also not telling you off for using these tools. It's really good what you're doing, and it kind of really helps with that collaboration between the IT administrator and the end user there. You could also implement a flow that sends you a new maker digest, so a list of kind of all the new resources that are being created in your environment, and you could get that weekly or daily, for example, and it just helps with the oversight of how many resources are being created, how many makers do I have, etc. So really kind of a really good way of staying on top of things there. You don't have to start from scratch there. Kind of to support your admin and governance story, there's the existing admin center, which we've seen, and there's the extensibility via connectors and PowerShell, where you can build your own stuff. What we're offering as a solution is a collection of templates of best practices that we've seen across our customers. We're calling that the COE Starter Kit, the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. You can download that, set it up in your own tenant. The Power BI dashboard that I showed earlier is part of the COE kit, and you can learn about your adoption. You can develop a strategy for how you want to support the platform. You get a tenant-wide overview of what's going on there. So there's a few different components to the COE Starter Kit. There's admin components. So we see those as components that are only kind of relevant to the admin persona. Those are the ones where tenant resources are cataloged. You get further insights into what's going on. You're able to implement, it helps you implement a DLP strategy and visibility. So there's a tool part of it that where you can play around with DLP policies, and you can see the impact that it would have on your tenant. So you can mitigate the risk of breaking resources in your tenant. By using that, there's the governance components. They implement the sample audit process. So it's kind of like, okay, so this application has been shared with 20 users. We can see it's being used quite regularly. It's probably becoming a critical application, it automatically sends an email to the maker to say, can you give us a little bit more information about this application? Can you give us a business justification? Can you give us a risk assessment? What's the workaround if this application wasn't available? And based on that information, you can create a support strategy around that. Part of the governance components is also a flow to kind of archive unused applications, so to avoid that app sprawl, to avoid all those device ordering solutions that are being created as part of App in a Day, kind of lying around in your tenant there. And then the third part is the nurture components. So the welcome email that I brought up, that's part of those components. You can kind of immediately configure that there. There's also a template catalog, so you can share templates with your makers much easier. There's things like a newsletter that provides product updates, and an app catalog through which you can highlight your company-wide applications and kind of encourage the adoption of those applications. My call to action is to establish an environment strategy if you don't have one. If everything lives in your default environment, you've probably got critical applications sitting there. Makers can modify those applications in production, and they can break those applications in production and risk a support call to someone who has no idea what PowerApps is. So really work on that, establishing an environment strategy and the help desk process there. Set up a bare minimum of data loss prevention policies, and the earlier you do that, the better, because otherwise you'll risk breaking resources that are already being used live. Leverage the out-of-the-box activity logs and analytics to really see what's going on in your tenant. Have a look there, check if anyone's already creating applications, if they're using flows, what connectors they're using. And don't start from scratch, kind of learn from the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. Even if you're not using the actual components that it comes with, it's a good opportunity to learn what's possible with the management connectors. And with the Power BI dashboard, you get a tenant-wide overview of what's going on. And once you've kind of got that oversight, you've implemented your security strategy, think about how you want to implement an audit process. What's important to your organization to audit? Is it how many people are using the application? Is it how many people it's shared with? Is it based on specific connector usage? And that will be kind of different for each organization. And then welcome new makers and identify champions. And I think here it's kind of really important to encourage makers, but also recognize what they're doing to motivate them to go the extra mile in making your digital transformation journey a reality. I've got a couple of resources up there. So there's an admin white paper that is a very long version of what I've just put into 45 minutes. A good resource. It also is the same structure as what we've talked about now. So it's secure, monitor, alert, and act. There's a COE starter kit again that you can download from GitHub. There's actually an admin in a day training, which is a full day kind of hands-on lab that goes through the content in much more detail than we've just done. You can also download that from GitHub, and we tend to offer it at conferences. So it was a pre-day yesterday, and typically before those conferences, we offer it as a pre-day. And then on Docs, you'll find the latest information. We've actually just updated it to incorporate the white paper into Docs, so having parity there, depending on how you want to consume that. So I'll go back to that slide in a second. I just wanted to bring up my contact details as well. If anyone wants to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn, please do. I'm based in the UK, but I work across all time zones. That leaves 10 minutes for questions if anyone has any. Or if you wanted to head to the pub sooner, that's okay as well.